a little while. Well, welcome everyone. We are at our time, so we want to make sure we have time for everybody. It's good to be together, and thank you for joining us here. This is sort of our classic time that we've had to have a little conversation about sermons or service or anything that was on people's mind. And those of you who have participated in the past know the conversation can be far-ranging at times. We had this first year that we had one for both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which was interesting, and it was kind of fun to hear some of the responses that people had to Rosh Hashanah. But I'd kind of open it up to whatever your reactions, questions that you'd like to have for the whole high holidays so far. It would be just lovely to hear what's on your mind and be able to share some thoughts. Let's open up, Henry.
I just wanted to say how much I've enjoyed the broadcast and the participation and the production values and the thoughtfulness that went into everything, editing, all of the work that the clergy and staff have put into making this broadcast and this time so perfect. It's practically it is a PBS, experience. So thank you.
Thank you for that. And I think you'll appreciate a little more as we go through the rest of the day some of the beautiful images they shot of the temple interior.
Yes.
You've seen some of it, and but they were really very, very thoughtful and very respectful about the space. So I think I was thinking of you as we were doing some of that. It's like, Henry's gonna love this moment.
Yeah, maybe doing some screenshots.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
I was thinking that even though clergy get to be closer to the wood and the bima and the Torah than many people sitting in the seats, still not that close. And I was even struck with how gorgeous. And as we were talking a little bit before we opened the Zoom room about, I've been, watching my friends all over the country and all over the world and their services, and they've been watching us, and everyone is so jealous of our space. And even these, the very ornate, like our synagogue is ornate, but our bima is very different. So I grew up in a synagogue, Isaac Mayer Wise in Cincinnati, that looks like Central Synagogue in New York. It's like the colors go through the whole thing. And it's really interesting how our bima is just this deep, and I'm sure Henry could tell us more about it, but the lack of color is so stunning. And so it's led to really interesting conversations, with even just my colleagues across the country. We're looking at the spaces, and they're just like so jealous of our sanctuary space and just how absolutely gorgeous it is, and to see it with new eyes, even when we get to be up close with it, more often. The production has been amazing. We really thank you, Josh, for again connecting our congregant Benjamin Arif to who runs he has his company, and all the team that he assembled to make this happen is really amazing.
It is.
That's a really interesting that people have commented on the lack of color.
Yeah.
Because this is actually something that I've been feeling badly about watching, because I independently, I didn't actually talk to any of you about it. I should have.
You took the chairs away.
I took the chairs out.
I think about it. Yes. Yeah.
Right. And I took the chairs out because it was this was a little bit of, Chekhovian response that if something's on the stage, you have to use it, or it shouldn't be there. And we're not going to sit in the chairs. Normally we have the bima full of our board members sitting there, and we weren't going to have any of that, and very intentionally. because we didn't, the whole point is nobody's in the sanctuary except us. So I kind of said I was sending the wrong message to have empty chairs, so I took them out. And then as I looked at it, I was saying, we just needed the color. I was really, that's actually not what the bima looks like.
Yeah.
Right. And I was wondering if people were feeling it as being overly bare. It's funny, these small
For
decisions.
Yom Kippur, I feel like for Yom Kippur it works.
Yeah, it's true.
But when
it's
we
true.
have to do this again in 100 years in the next plague, we'll leave notes. We'll leave very detailed notes, like you said, at Rosh Hashanah, of how should you do this. But we'll all be avatars and everything by then anyway. So
that's true. Yeah. So we may still be around for it. Who knows? Great. Thanks, Henry. Any other reactions, questions, or thoughts?
I love the fact that you and Raina kept changing spaces. Like we'd be you, and then it'd be Raina, and then it'd be you, and then it'd be Raina, and nobody ever walked off or walked on. It was just, and since you worked with a magician, I figured that's where it all came from.
Actually, the magic work was trying to make that not so obvious, because in the original, as we're looking at the original cuts, it was instant transformation, presto change-o, which is absolutely what we didn't want. So we kind of softened all of that a little bit. But what we, as we talked about, those of you who were on the conversation when we just talked about how the decisions were made and how we went about filming this, for a variety of reasons, things were not recorded in order, as Rabbi Joseph said in our sermon. We had the professional choir, and we recorded everything that the choir was going to do at once, and then we had to drop these things in at various places, and so it was just, and then in a movie there's probably someone whose job is continuity, who makes copious notes all the time and makes sure that all of these things are very precise. That was us. We were the continuity check. So it's the magic effects were the accidents more than the intention.
But I'm glad they were there, because if it had been too perfect, that would have been kind of weird. I mean, it needed to have enough stuff that you go, oh, because yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and I saw the comment about seeing the texture, which I think is, what we really wanted to think of was, what are the advantages to this new reality? How can we use the technology and the fact it was being filmed in ways that enhance the experience?
One thing I realized today that I didn't really realize on Rosh Hashanah, because I hadn't heard the how you put this together part, was that Cantor could see the choir, and you could kind of see her looking at them to cue them. And I didn't notice that particularly on Rosh Hashanah, but that must have been much better for her than having them up in the choir loft and the mirror and all of that stuff. So it was nice. I was actually kind of watching her facial expressions as she would cue them, and it was nice. You could feel that they were there, so then that made it more like we were there.
I liked having the choir, physically present. It was, although very, very spread out. So that was also kind of strange, because they're, each one 20 feet apart from the other. So it was all strange.
Is it okay if I shift a little bit?
Please.
First of all, I have to tell it, I know I keep repeating myself all the time, but I'm always so delighted to see everybody. It just feels so good. And then I have to say, Rabbi Joseph, you helped culminate for me what my thoughts have been this whole holy season, and maybe for the last 6 months, because I think it's been so easy for me to be a Jew in America, and I put the two together. I think I've talked about this with people a little bit, and I kept thinking about, can I be a Jew if I don't have America? Because it's always been, oh, do something good for the world. Well, yeah, in America you can lobby, you can do this, you can do that, and so I've been thinking about Judaism without a democracy. And could I be there? Would I be there? And I kept going back and forth and thinking. And finally, I kind of ended up in where but you said it so beautifully today. You just said it so beautifully with that. Yes, I can still love Judaism. I can still be a part of Judaism no matter what happens. And so I appreciate that.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you. And it's so interesting to hear what you take away and what everybody takes away. It's always, just to say as an outset, which we said before, it's always a strange experience to give a sermon, or those of us that do teaching and speeches, just when it's not a conversation. It's especially bizarre in this world, whether you're in the empty synagogue or in the empty basement, where I am right now, to not have the feedback, and to wonder, like to really wonder, because at least in the moment, sometimes you hear gasping or or maybe somebody walks out, and so I appreciate, because you just have no idea. So that's a very interesting way. I'm glad that it spoke to you in that way. And I think part of it was just the idea of cracking ourselves open and being able to be in that place of vulnerability, it's not a place where we want to live. Even though I frequently will use personal stories as a way in, I really am not, you can ask the people that know me well, I'm really not, don't really love living in that place of vulnerability. I enjoy, trying to get that out of other people, but because it's what we use as a wall of protection. And so I think that is part of this. We just have to step in and just say, yeah, how are we going to do this? And how are we going to do this together? How are we going to put that one foot in front of the other and continue to make this world the place that we want to live in?
Yeah, I agree.
Walk forward. We can't walk backwards.
I've never really have felt as vulnerable as I've been feeling. And so I agree. And I don't want to feel vulnerable.
And we have to.
Yeah. And Joseph, I wanted to say too that I just was very moved by your sermon. It's funny that I have a couple of guys working on some things in my house, and at the very moment I was watching your sermon, they flipped the circuit breaker, and I was like, oh no, my computer shut down. But one thing I just wanted to share with you, and I know I talk too much at these things, but I have to show you something that sits on my desk every day that I hope you get a kick out of. I don't know if you can see this.
Oh yes.
Back up.
Daring greatly. Brene Brown.
This is like
Well, that's who you're, the TED Talk.
This is like it's not her TED Talk, but
No, this is one of her books.
She's like one of my gurus.
Yeah, one of my, my wife is one of my best editors, and she told me that I do too much Brene Brown. And I said, I don't care. I'm not taking that out. So so yes.
You can always do. You can't go wrong with Brene Brown.
You hear a lot of Brene Brown.
Watch her talk on Netflix. Have you seen her Netflix show?
I have not watched it yet.
Yeah, you gotta watch it. Okay.
I do need to watch it.
So I'd like to be the yet another person to say that both sermons were very powerful, and thank you both. Rabbi Kahana, there was one thing I'm a little confused about from your. So the message about your choosing to stand with the community and decline peer pressure at the risk of offense to wear a mask. I couldn't help but think back to a previous sermon where you talked about your visit to Palestine, where you made essentially the opposite decision, that you chose to discard the symbol of Jewish community, your kippah, in order to avoid giving offense to your Palestinian hosts. So I'm wondering if you could give us a little guidance about where do you make that decision and draw the line where giving offense versus standing for the community is the right decision to make?
That's a really nice comparison. Thank you for drawing that. And it hadn't occurred to me to connect those two things. So without having thought deeply about that connection, I would say that mask wearing is not merely a sensitivity or a social norm. It's a reality during a pandemic of pikuach nefesh, of protecting the lives of others. So the question is, when someone takes something that is a healthcare issue and turns it into a social question, is that do you respond in kind? You know, my first, as I said in the sermon, my first inclination when someone's yelling at me on the street to take off my mask, the first thought is, what did I do wrong? And you know, how did I give offense? Gosh, I'm sorry that I gave offense somehow. And then to realize that I didn't give offense. I mean, if that someone took it as offense, that really is on them and not on me. That I'm doing it because I want to be a socially responsible person. I'm not doing it to protect me. As we know, these masks are not really about protecting yourself. They're about protecting other people, because you could be a carrier and not know it. And that we have a responsibility, and that we're in this together, which was really the element that I wanted to bring forward more than anything else, is about that shared responsibility to deal with a pandemic.
Although, you know, Rabbi, one thing that's interesting about that is, because masks have become sort of this fashion statement now, like people wearing a Black Lives Matter mask or a, you know, whatever your theme is, mask. And I think people are like, I love people who have a mask that says vote, but it's turning it into a political issue, whereas maybe just having a plain old white mask might be, you know, better. I think people are kind of turning it into something which I think is cool, but which could foster that that feeling that it's not just about keeping everyone safe. It's becoming a fashion statement or a political statement, and I think that's maybe a problem.
That's fair, though. I think we tend to do that with everything.
Yeah,
you know, that is kind of our reality. I think someday someone's going to do a really interesting sociological investigation of t-shirts. Like, how did a t-shirt become, you know, a statement of brand first of all, and then, you know, political affiliations and all the things like that should be just a garment that covers you up. But that tends to be what we do. But none of that, I think, takes away from the fact that, you know, we're in a pandemic, and the most effective means we have of controlling the spread of the disease is a mask, and it's just weird that became a political thing that has nothing to do with what's on the mask, just the wearing of the mask. But as I said, you know, the research is that's, you know, the same thing happened 100 years ago.
So to
and the same thing probably happened, by the way, during other kinds of plagues, when people would do certain things that were supposed to protect you, that probably became hugely controversial. I think that's part of our nature sometimes. I'm sorry.
So no. Well, I'm thinking that in your sermon, you did stress this as part of community. And if I want to play devil's advocate, if you were out in the street and not close to anyone, then wearing the mask in those circumstances is more of a symbolism than actually preventing contagion. Certainly, if you're, it's absolutely, necessary for medical reasons to be wearing masks when you're in proximity with others. But it doesn't sound like the story around.
I feel
it depends where you are on the street. And then flipping the opposite side of that, if you were wearing a yarmulke in the presence of Palestinians, you weren't doing it to give offense. You were doing it as a symbol of your membership in the Jewish community. So again, I'm just trying to understand. Certainly, the save a life, is obviously, something that overrides other commandments. But your sermon stressed this as a member as responsibility to community. So again, I'm trying to understand, other than medical necessity, are there other places where you draw that line? And what was it that made it the moral choice to remove your yarmulke in Palestine as opposed to removing your mask in Portland, in a place where if you are not endangering others?
Well, two things. First of all, the reality of where I was, I mean, I didn't tell the entire story of the mask, but as it happened, I was driving in my car and someone was driving my car in the opposite direction. And my car is a convertible, so it was easy for me to sort of hear what they were. So absolutely, I was wearing my mask because we were about to park and go into a place and I didn't want to fiddle with my mask. And I know I was about to go inside somewhere. The point is, what difference did it make to that person? Like, in what way was I harming that person by wearing a mask? Right. And in the instance of going into Palestinian territory, that was an instance of potentially giving offense, right? That because that not just the fact of wearing a kippah, but particular kippah I wear is a kippah saruga, which is a knitted kippah, which in Israel is a symbol of settlers. So it would be a lot like, wandering into certain parts of Oregon with a MAGA hat, Portland with a MAGA hat. It's a statement. Maybe you make that statement. Maybe that's an intentional thing to do, and you make that statement. In that instance, that really wasn't the statement that I was trying to make with them. I was trying to be a good guest. I was invited to meet with Palestinian leadership along with a group of rabbis. It could have been, in that instance, it could have been out of fear that I would be attacked. That wasn't what was on my mind. It was the fact that I wanted to be a good guest and not give an unintentional message of allegiance that doesn't reflect who I am personally or what my political beliefs were. So sometimes you do have to be aware of what those are. I think, again, because masks have become politicized, it's complicated, and I think that if I were me, and I happen to be, I would wear a mask in instances that are not publicly, in instances that are not medically required, because I want to give that message, because I want to make that statement that, yes, we are in a pandemic and we should be doing something about it. And I want to be a responsible citizen. In many ways, it's exactly 180 from the story of being in the Palestinian territories, right? I want to be very clear about the message that I am sending. And if it happens to give offense to someone, I don't understand why it gives offense to someone. That makes no sense to me. And so I don't see it as an act of defiance. I see it as an act of community. But if it were an act of defiance, I would do it in that instance.
And Rabbi, I agree with you totally on that, because a yarmulke is something that you might hurt someone's feelings wearing or not wearing it. When it comes to a mask, it's a medical proven fact scientifically that the mask is going to prevent spreading the virus. That's the most important thing. And if someone else wants to view that as a political statement, that's their issue. If you choose to wear your own mask, you're not telling someone else to put it on. You're saying, I'm wearing a mask. I think it's the right thing to do because medically it makes a difference. If I wear or don't wear a yarmulke, it's not going to medically affect you of getting something other than maybe pissed off or a smile.
Yeah, and thank you. And Andy points out, I just want to share. Andy points out that there are those who, the homeless in our community, who don't have access to masks. Yeah. And in some ways, that I think that statement of our responsibility of universal mask wearing and that sensitivity to those who don't have access to it is important too.
It's fascinating to me because I think, and I'm making some assumptions here, but I'm making them based on a lifetime of experience. I think you're wearing the mask, and whoever the person was, shouting at you or telling you to take the mask off, Rabbi, is an example of their vulnerability, because you show them just by your actions what being vulnerable and not being vulnerable are all about.
Look at you, Barbara, tying our sermons together. Nicely
Yes.
done.
Well,
Yeah, I think
I
there's
mean, that's what
something.
struck me.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it, and I think that that perhaps that is part of the reason that people respond so aggressively to other people who wear masks, that they don't want to feel vulnerable. That my wearing a mask makes that person feel vulnerable, or
Yes.
reminds them of their vulnerability, and that's another good reason to wear a mask.
I have
Yeah.
if that's
I
the
have a different
reality.
take on why he may not, a person told you take off your mask, and that person must have felt you weren't being sufficiently American and you weren't exercising your freedoms to do what you want. And that's a pretty insidious thought process. And then you take it one step further. Mask wearing was abhorrent to that person because they perceived it as a violation of their liberties. But then when peaceful protesters are walking down the streets of Portland and the Trump people come in their trucks firing paintballs and spraying pepper spray, it's a manifestation of the same problem. It's just been escalated to take action rather than just words. And that scares me. That's frightening to me when there's a disconnect like that between words and action. And okay, they can say what they want. It's a free country. But however misguided they may be. But when they take action based on those beliefs, that's scary. That is depriving our democracy of one of its pillars. And I don't see any solution to this in near term.
You know, none of us know the person that yelled this at you, and we don't know their exact motivation, et cetera. But I think it's a mistake for us to take that, to not recognize that this isn't just individuals saying, I don't want you wearing a mask. We are in the context of discourse where the person with the biggest microphone in the world is talking about not wearing masks and holding rallies about not wearing masks, where it is being used as a methodology to activate and to foster discord. We also, in all of the services, there has been a prayer that we have read about tyranny being no more, about the need for ethics, about the need to stand for justice, about the importance of truth. And regardless of party, we have been pretty silent on the casting confusion, intentionally casting confusion about the very clear call from epidemiologists and scientists about what we need to do to keep people safe and to protect life. That is not ethics, and that is a violation of so many of our Jewish values. And that's happening. 200,000 people just about have died. Some of them would have anyway, but many, many would not have. And that dissembling that is taking place is something that concerns me, that we are not being a little bit more clear about how that goes against our values as a community. Because a part of what was wonderful in the sermon about we pray together, we ask for forgiveness together, it's us and we, and about community, that with that is also holding accountability for the leaders in our community to act with the interests of the community in mind. And I don't know about your individual mask yeller, but I think divorcing that from the broader discourse and the messages that are being sent that are quite dangerous is something that we should be cognizant of.
That's thank you, Eric. Beautifully said. And the reality of the world that we're living in, nothing can be divorced from its context. So, you know, telling a story and trying to get this little moment, you know, it does have to have the context it swims in. I mean, yeah, for all the reasons that you say, and for reasons that are just, is nefarious the right word, is self-serving? It's a lot of different things. In any scenario that I would imagine, if I was writing this science fiction story of this era, this pandemic that we're living in, the most patriotic thing you could do would be to wear a mask. Right? Every mask should have a flag on it. It is, you know, this is protecting American lives. This is, how are we going to get out of this recession? How are we going to get our kids back to school? How are we going to get to some semblance of a normal world? It's only going to be by conquering the pandemic. The only way we have at this moment is through mask wearing. I mean, that the government should be printing those masks up and sending them to every American, and every person who lives in the country. Right? So it is just, I don't understand. I mean, I understand, but I don't understand how it is that we're in this world that we're wearing, where the person who considers themselves to be patriotic is the one who's yelling at other people to take off their mask. Not knowing their circumstances, not speaking of vulnerability. They don't know how vulnerable I am. They don't know what my underlying conditions are. They don't know what context. They don't know who the person is in the seat next to me. Nothing. They know nothing. You know, it is, and that's the symbolism, right? Which is more powerful than sign. The symbolism that we are struggling with right now. Which, you know, and to bring it back to where we said before, you know, there is symbolism to the kippah by all means. And sometimes I have no control over how people perceive my kippah, right? And there's a certain place where I will say, you know, I intentionally put on a kippah. Nobody forces me to do it. I made this decision myself. And there's an intentional part of it where I recognize that to some people, you know, it's an invitation for anti-Semitism, and for some people, it's a statement. Who knows what it's a statement of? And for some people, it's a sign of solidarity. And I can't control other people's response to those. But when I can control them, when I do understand what the context is that I'm in, I do want to make sure that I'm doing it intentionally. I'll give another example of that, just which I think I mentioned another time when I've talked about the kippah. I'm not Shomer Shabbos personally. I drive on Shabbat. You know, that's a decision that I've made. But I do not wear a kippah when I drive on Shabbat. And I'm very intentional about that, because I don't want to put out into the world that someone who doesn't know who I am and doesn't know my rationale and doesn't know my decision-making process is going to say, there goes an Orthodox Jew driving on Shabbat, right? Etc. Right? I can't control their thought process, but I can say I don't want to create a situation in which that process would be misunderstood. Just to take that example a little bit further, right? I think mask wearing is the opposite, because I do know that someone takes this as an affront against liberty, and I want to wear and if I'm in their face about it, then I'm in their face about it, to be sort of funny about that. But I don't care that that's what they see. In fact, because I think they're wrong. Because I think I'm doing something highly patriotic and appropriate to the situation that we live in.
And in fact, Rabbi, you have as much right to exercise your liberty as they do to exercise theirs. And if it's your choice to wear, if it's your choice to wear a mask, then they have no right to chastise you for it any more than any more than they think you have a right to chastise them.
Right, because and this is a sign. I mean, and Eric's absolutely right. This is a sign that this is not coming from a place of thoughtful intention or a political construct like libertarianism. Saying, look, you're free, go do whatever you want. Until it affects me, until it adversely affects me. Go ahead. I don't care what you do. Right, at which you would sort of assume that that's where some of this is coming from, but it's not. It's the opposite. It is being whipped up as a way of a tribal affiliation, and all those elements.
Rabbi, I had a
sorry, I couldn't see Randy's comment there. Yeah. Sorry. Anyway, should we move on? There are probably other things to say than masks. Welcome to continue.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thanks, Darren.
Just start talking, Sally.
I do have a question. Something that has come up a little bit in some discussions in our congregation, and I'm wondering if there were clergy discussions, I'm sure there were, in the broader U.S. community about sermons and content that how far you can go in discussing our political situation without crossing the line into partisan speech while weighing our moral obligations. I hope that's clear. What I'm asking.
No, that's clear. Rabbi Joseph, you pay attention to what other people are saying in the world. I don't.
And I think, Sally, we've talked about this. So yeah, I mean, I think it's always complicated. I think especially for us as Reform Jews and on the liberal side of having lots of autonomy of what and the freedom of the pulpit and what we want to talk about. I mean, just to remind us that the whole freedom of the pulpit issue, that this famous letter that was written by Stephen S. Wise was written from our synagogue. So, we have deep history of that. We have a tradition where, you can listen this afternoon in a remembrance of Rabbi Rose, a blessed memory of his, famous sermon from a couple years ago, which is still reverberating, and you can hear it again. And it's very complicated. I actually think the issue is more about how do you want to use the pulpit at a time when you know that the most people are watching now or are listening or may be open. I've had some side conversations with folks and during this, conversation about that. So, I mean, I think there's the easy thing to just say, look, the law tells us you can do everything up to endorsing a candidate. So there's no problem right now as far as our tax status. If we're going to talk about legal stuff, just to get the legal stuff out of the way, our tax status is only in jeopardy if we got up and we told you who to vote for. Our tax status is actually not in jeopardy if I got up there and repeated what Rabbi Rose said and said, impeach the president. That's the person who's the president right now. It's not about election or re-election. So the tax status is is one piece of that. So neither one of us would ever get up and say, vote for this person, don't vote for that person. And we actually are allowed to get up and say, vote for this issue. If I wanted to get up and say, here's what's before you in Multnomah County or in Portland or in the state of Oregon, or, you know, the governor's putting forth this, I want you to vote for it because of that, that's actually okay when it comes to issues. It's just candidates where the line is. Once you take that off the table, then it's the real question of, what is our role as religious leaders, and having this opportunity, this amazing opportunity and responsibility of being able to share messages and ideas and wanting to inspire. And every rabbi has a different way of doing that. Rabbi Kahana and I approach it also from very different ways. And so you know, even for me, I'll say this year, so I have generally, personally, made the decision to not go deep into politics on the high holidays. I personally, and you know, in the past have said, listen, we preach all the time on Friday nights and we have all these different opportunities. I want to bring people along in different ways, and I'm not going to use Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur to do that. And I actually, for the first time, dabbled this Yom Kippur. And it was a conversation, because when I first said I was going to do a sermon on vulnerability, it was nothing like where it ended up, which I think just, you know, a little behind the scenes, that's all of us, right? We sort of think about what do we want to share? Why do we want to share it? I had all different ideas, and all of a sudden I sent a draft to my colleagues like Mr. Kaczynski and Rabbi Kahana and all this, and had these conversations going, wait a minute, that's not what you said you were going to write about. That's not how you said you were going to do this. So I think that sometimes the world that we live in calls for different responses. And one of the pieces that I believe, and I'll say, I said it privately to Andy O, I'm gonna call him Andy O from now on, is that I really believe that extremists knock down the door for moderates to walk through. And I really believe that, you know, everything that we can start to spark, you know, the conversations and the ideas in ways that will bring everybody along. And that's how I generally view it, is I really don't want to alienate people. I really take my role as a leader in this congregation, this very diverse congregation, this large congregation. We are not a monolith at all, as we can see by some of the comments. You know, it can feel like it, and we're not. Is to say, how can we, in the context of Jewish values, come together in a way that's going to make this world a better place? And I know that for myself, definitely skirted the line a little bit, and really did bring in some of the political issues that are happening right now in our backyard, because I couldn't not talk about it. But I also hope that it was in a way that everybody could be open to. And I know that I can't control that. I mean, the hardest part of anything you do is that you cannot control how anything is received. You know, I put it out, and how you receive it is how you receive it. And that's good and bad. And I hope that just means that conversations can come from it. But generally, I try and use high holidays to think about big concepts that we're all sort of evaluating our lives in this moment and where we fit into the world and community, to then help us into the daily issues. And again, but I think everybody approaches it in a very different way. So, I mean, again, the beauty of this time is that you can go online and watch a lot of sermons. Like I watched a lot of sermons last night and this morning, and it is interesting to see what people spoke about and what their communities were that they spoke about. So I know I just went in lots and lots of circles of how
I think
Rabbi Kahana can.
No, I think you said it very well. And you know, for those who don't know, this was actually Rabbi Joseph's profession before becoming a rabbi. I was a lobbyist dealing with these issues of how should I say it, with religion and state. So she's extremely well versed in it. I think one of the things, so that was really well said and laid out the lines clearly. Sally, I think one of what was kind of underlying your question, I think, was actually like, is there some sort of mechanism out there where all the rabbis are saying, or someone's holding a seminar who says, you are allowed to do this, you are not allowed to do that, just as Rabbi Joseph said? And the answer to that is no. I haven't participated in anything like that. I don't think that exists. We sometimes get that. I've been to some seminars dealing with Israel where some rabbis have talked about what they feel comfortable with and what they don't feel comfortable with. But there's no one out there regulating rabbi speech. We're all aware of what the Johnson Amendment is and what that extent is, but it's not. We know where that line is. The question really becomes all the things Rabbi Joseph said. What do you want to do with this little bit of time that you have as a rabbi, where you do have the attention of a lot of people? And what do you want to do? What do you want to say with that time? And I think that it varies on your personal proclivities. It varies on where you are. I think that and what the time period is that you're in. Giving high holiday sermons during presidential election years is terrible. It's always terrible. It's always just not. Everybody's, especially because the high holidays are always so close to the election themselves, everybody's tensions are very high. Everybody's at a certain, they're at a fever pitch. One of the things that one of the things I think about is sort of where are we as a nation in this particular election, which, as in this, how shall I say this? There are no swing voters. I mean, there might be swing states, but at this point, where tens of thousands of people have already voted, everybody is pretty locked into their position. So, there's a certain place where you can get lots of cheers from people who agree with you and lots of boos from people who don't agree with you. And what have you actually done? What is the usefulness of what you've done with that time? I think that there are some really deep questions about the future of our democracy. There are some really deep questions about the vulnerabilities that we talked about, and there are issues that are great, and I think they're really appropriate realms for those things. And if you listen to, one of the things that we like to say, this is not the only sermon we give, right? If you've been listening to some of the sermons that we've been giving leading up to this time, you'll hear quite a lot of opinions and deeply held beliefs. I think the decisions were made as we came to this, and also recognizing that Rabbi Joseph recorded today's sermon very recently, as you heard from the reference she made. I recorded my sermons about a week and a half ago. And the world changes very, very rapidly. You're trying to project forward a little bit. I think we said what we felt, both of us said what we felt we needed to say in this moment. And it's a complex decision how you get there.
Andy had his hand up. Go ahead, Andy.
I just want to say, having the Robert Peltz Memorial Fund was a wonderful thing to do. And one of the things that I came to realize fairly recently is that I guess it would be wonderful if we had this kind of fund going on throughout the whole year. And we had efforts around every B'nai Mitzvah to encourage folks to participate in supporting the broader community of Portland. I tend to not ignore the national scene, but focus more on our local community. And I think our synagogue has done a lot around Northwest Towers and around food-related projects. But I think it tends to be focused around the high holidays. And although we do have a strong social action committee, given the numbers of people that we have, we could be doing so much more. And when I look around Old Town Chinatown, we have a humanitarian disaster on our hands of, frankly, biblical proportions. And I think that our local government, although they're trying, you can just ask our own Sharon Myron how she feels about the responses that government and, in some cases, the business community are taking. I know that businesses are suffering in Old Town Chinatown, and restaurants are closing. But there's some simple things that we could do. One example would be to buy food from Stone Soup. Just an example. If you're having a party at your house, if you're having a B'nai Mitzvah, if you're interested in catering lunch for your employees, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of ways that we can shift as a community to focusing on attacking this humanitarian crisis, buying masks and donating them to some of the nonprofits that, like Street Medicine, which is something that Dr. Sharon Myron is involved in. Anyway, with that, I will mute myself.
Thanks, Andy. That is really great, and I think I really want to give kudos to the group that put together these videos for the Robert Peltz Funds for Food. I think they've been great. We've been showing them all the weeks leading up to. What's that?
I said Jim Richmond was on, so thank you to.
Oh, Jim was there. Oh, yes, he was.
I can't see now if he's still there. Jim and Leslie Peltz, of course, to really do that. And we've been, first of all, thank you for the preview for the 2 o'clock panel. Sally, who's still here, Sally, who chairs our social action committee. And we're going to talk about the things that we're doing and then ways of looking ahead, the things we want to do. And, we have been so fortunate beyond the Robert Peltz Funds for Food Drive, which we haven't allocated that money yet, but we've raised over $15,000. We've also given out just in the past, just during the pandemic, Sally will correct me, but maybe $30,000 has been donated, probably close to, that we've given out. And that will continue. And you are correct. We actually were just talking this week about how we want to also promote and get out all of our congregations that are involved, like yourself, Andy, and Cascaded Clusters, and being able to volunteer. And you'll be happy to know that a lot of the B'nai Mitzvah kids, it's exactly what they're doing right now is how can we get, mass people working a lot with Blanchet House and all the different outreach of, getting the bags, making COVID kits, of food and hand sanitizer and masks and raising money for different organizations and serving food. And so you can see that shift. Yeah. And we always need to be doing more. So I think it's such a good reminder just to add to that, because we're going to talk about it also too, but I saw Eric saying about getting out the vote. We've had, Sally, unmute yourself, because I want you to remind me how many households and how many postcards we sent, and now we're moving to texts and emails. What was it?
We don't even have enough.
I know.
Sally?
So with our Every Voice, Every Vote, which is the name of the campaign from our national reform body, which we've participated in, and we partnered with another organization called the Center for Common Ground, and that campaign to do outreach to voters who are in states that have suppressive voter laws targeting, which affect primarily voters of color. We have done 5,640 postcards just from our congregation. Nationally, the reform movement did over 300,000, and the total Reclaim Our Vote is over 6 million postcards.
So it's really, it's
really
amazing. It really felt like something that, as you point out, can really engage people at all levels, you know, then especially folks who felt like, I don't feel like I can really get out, but this thing I can do from home is now shifting from postcards. So come to that. And I know we're going to have to wrap up, but I do want to make a plug that you then, once you log off of here, that you log on to the study session at 1 o'clock with my father teaching. And it's Unatana Tokef in a pandemic time. And he's a great teacher. So I feel like whatever he teaches, that it's worth being a part of.
I'll second that, and he's not my father. Yeah, absolutely. And Josh is putting up the links to all of the study opportunities for the rest of the day, and follow those links. And if they're also on the Temple's website, put together really an incredible list of opportunities, all kinds of things that are happening today. Wendy Westerwell's telling some lovely stories mixed with some songs from Cantor. It's very full. A lot to experience today. Thank you all to everybody who's been on. Really great comments. Much to talk about with all of these things. Look forward to continuing the conversation too, not just in this particular Zoom, but all together. It's great to be with you all. Your wonderful, blessed community. It's good to be together.
Yes. Gemar Tov, everybody.
Gemar Tov. Shana Tova.
Good to see you.